After the surgery, everything changed: my rhythm, my routines, and my view of the world outside my window. I'd spent most of my adult life on my feet, either building houses with my own hands or walking my daughter to school every morning in the same pair of boots. But after the accident on the job site, a fall that shattered my lower spine, those boots were boxed up, and a wheelchair became my new mode of existence. Recovery was slow and humbling. The hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the helplessness. And so when the doctors finally said I could live independently, I searched high and low for a quiet place, with flat sidewalks, reliable mail delivery, and some sun on the porch. That's how I ended up at Meadow Hills, a neighborhood that promised peace-trimmed hedges and a strong sense of community. I should have known that last part was a warning. My daughter helped me move in. She was already juggling 2 kids and a job, but she made the 4-hour trip just to set up my kitchen, arrange my medication drawer, and leave a pie cooling on the windowsill, like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. We were both hopeful this would be a fresh start. No loud neighbors, no stairs, no drama. Just a small, brick house with a good roof and room for my wheelchair to roll from room to room. Before she left, she kissed the top of my head and whispered, "You've earned your rest, Dad." That first week, I focused on building my independence back piece by piece. I installed a small wooden ramp at the front entrance, nothing fancy, just enough for my wheels to roll down to the mailbox without asking for help. I made sure it was safely secured, stained to match the porch, and kept the pathway clear at all times. Neighbors waved, dogs barked, kids rode their bikes by and offered a cautious "Hello, sir." I smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was good. Until the clipboard came. It was a Thursday morning. I remember it because I'd just brewed my second cup of coffee and was watching the light scatter across the dew-covered lawn. That's when she appeared. Mid-50s, tight blonde bob, pastel pink cardigan draped just so, and a clipboard held like a judge's gavel. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She pointed with the end of a ballpoint pen and said, "That ramp's not in compliance with HOA aesthetic standards." I blinked. "Excuse me." She took a photo just like that and wrote something on her form. "Unapproved construction. We'll need it removed immediately. It disrupts the uniformity of the block's visual profile." I stared at her, unsure if I'd misheard. "Ma'am, that's my wheelchair ramp." She looked at me as if I'd said the sky was green. "Yes, and you didn't apply for a design variance. That's a violation. You should have gone through the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. It's in the handbook." I hadn't read the handbook. I'd been too busy learning how to transfer from my bed to my chair without bruising my legs. But even then, I knew this wasn't just about paperwork. I could feel it in her tone and the way her eyes scanned me, like I was a problem, not a neighbor. "I'll look into it," I said, trying to stay polite, but she was already walking away. The letter came the next day. A formal violation notice with a $200 fine and a demand to remove the structure within 7 days or face additional penalties. No mention of ADA protections. No offer to discuss alternatives. Just cold ink on HOA letterhead. I called the number listed at the bottom. The voicemail box was full. I called again, still full. I emailed, no response. That weekend, I stayed home. I didn't go to the grocery store. I didn't roll down to the little bench at the corner of the block. I just sat on my porch, staring at that ramp. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was my freedom. My access to the world. And someone with a clipboard wanted it gone because it didn't match the neighborhood. When my daughter called on Sunday night, I lied and said everything was fine. She had enough on her plate already. I didn't want to be another emergency. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to roll over and let them take my life apart piece by piece. Not again. I'd been through worse. I'd been trapped under rubble with 2 broken legs and crawled my way out using just my elbows. I'd survived 6 months in rehab where people gave up every day. So no Karen and her clipboard weren't going to break me. But I also knew this wasn't a fight to rush into. People like her didn't play fair. They hid behind rules and bylaws, behind meetings and minutes, behind phrases, like "for the good of the community." I needed to understand the system before I could challenge it. So I started reading. I printed the entire HOA handbook, 47 pages of policies, clauses, and obscure homeowner obligations. I marked every page that mentioned accessibility, modification, or variance. I looked up the Americans with Disabilities Act. I printed county zoning maps and scanned past meeting minutes. I watched hours of city council meetings on public record. What I found chilled me. Karen wasn't just a board member. She was the chair. She'd been on the board for nearly a decade and had a reputation for being difficult. She'd fined people for planting the wrong species of rose bushes, for having wind chimes, for putting up seasonal decorations too early. And now she had set her sights on me. She didn't see a man rebuilding his life. She saw an eyesore on her perfect street, while she was about to find out that some eyesores can see just fine, and I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't see her again for 2 weeks, not in person at least, but she was everywhere, in the new fines posted in my mailbox, in the printed notices taped to my door, and in the silent stares of neighbors who seemed to have been told something about me I hadn't said myself. The second notice came on a Wednesday morning. Final warning: unauthorized structure must be removed or HOA will intervene. They didn't even use the word ramp this time, just structure, as if it were a shed, as if it weren't my lifeline to the world. By then, I had contacted a local ADA advocacy group. They were sympathetic, but cautious. The ADA does apply, the woman on the phone told me, but HOAs often ignore it until someone forces them not to. I looked at the ramp that afternoon as though it were already gone. It was just 8 feet of wood built at a gentle slope, with rails my daughter helped me install. The only thing unauthorized about it was that I hadn't gone through some performative, punitive committee approval. It was safe, clean, and vital. I left a voicemail at the HOA office explaining the situation. I mentioned the ADA. I quoted Section 182, B2, H2 about reasonable accommodations. I even included it in writing certified mail. They signed for it. I heard nothing. Then came the day Karen showed up again. It was a bright Saturday. The sun made the sidewalk look too clean, too staged, like one of those artificial neighborhoods built for real estate catalogs. I was watering the flower box from a chair at the top of my ramp when I heard the sharp, deliberate click of heels on concrete. She was dressed in white again, some kind of HOA armor, I assumed, and flanked by 2 other board members. I recognized one of them as a guy I'd seen walking his Labradoodle in a golf visor. The other was a woman who looked like she could smell dissent before it reached the street. Karen didn't smile. She pointed her pen again, this time to the top bolt of the ramp. "You've had ample notice," she said. "We've received no application, no appeal. And as of Monday, we will be removing the structure." I looked at the woman beside her. "You know this violates federal law, right? The ADA protects access ramps. You can't just remove it." The woman spoke with a voice that had the consistency of cold soup. "This is private property, governed by HOA agreements. You signed the paperwork. This isn't a public sidewalk. The ADA has limited jurisdiction in this context." She was wrong. I knew it. But I also knew that fighting them verbally would go nowhere. Karen stepped closer. Besides, she added with a faux concerned frown, "It's unsightly. This neighborhood has standards. We can't allow one homeowner to bring down the value for everyone else." I let that hang in the air. Unsightly. That's what my access to groceries, to sunlight, to life looked like to her. An aesthetic inconvenience. I stared right at her and said calmly, "Touch that ramp, and I promise you'll regret it." She tilted her head mockingly. "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's a guarantee." She snorted, scribbled something on her clipboard, and walked away. Her 2 hench people followed, but the woman with the cold soup voice glanced back. Her eyes flickered just briefly, maybe doubt, maybe guilt. But she turned anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside sounded like a truck backing in. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a countdown. I stared at the ceiling fan, replaying the conversation. I didn't know what they were going to do, but I knew they were going to do it soon, and they were going to try and make it legal. On Monday morning, I heard hammering. Not the sharp, rhythmic kind that means construction. The erratic, heavy-handed kind that means destruction. I wheeled to the front door just in time to see 2 men in neon vests removing the bolts from the base of my ramp. One of them saw me and stopped. "HOA ordered this," he mumbled. "They said the homeowner approved it." I laughed. It was bitter hollow. Did the homeowner also approve being trapped inside his own house? The man blinked. Look, I'm just following the work order." "I understand," I said cold. "But please understand this. You're violating federal law right now. You remove that ramp and I promise you'll be subpoenaed." That got his attention. He called someone, maybe Karen. There was arguing. He walked away to take the call, came back with a shrug, and said, "They said it's already been processed." He bent down and unbolted the last piece. And just like that, my ramp was gone. That afternoon, I sat in my living room, stuck. I stared at the patch of sunlight on the sidewalk, just out of reach. I felt like a prisoner in my own home because that's exactly what I was. But it wouldn't be for long. I opened the file I'd been building. Photos, emails, the certified letter, ADA references. I even had timestamps from the security camera I'd hidden in my doorbell. It showed the men removing the ramp. It showed Karen pointing. I made 5 phone calls that day. 1 to my daughter, 1 to the ADA legal aid office, 1 to the local news tip line, 1 to a lawyer I'd met at a veterans event 2 years ago, and 1 to the county clerk's office. The storm was coming, and for once, I wasn't the one who should be afraid of it. The next morning, I watched the sunlight creep across the floorboards like a silent reminder that I was stuck again. Without the ramp, even a small step down to the path was like the edge of a cliff. The porch that once meant freedom had become a prison wall. I tried not to let the feeling sink too deep, but it was impossible to ignore. There's a particular kind of quiet that fills a house when you've been rendered immobile. Not just physically, but legally, psychologically. It seeps in through the walls and presses against your chest. I hadn't felt that kind of stillness since the hospital bed, since waking up with no sensation in my legs and wondering what life had decided to take away next. I spent that day making calls. My lawyer, his name was Calvin Grant, was sympathetic, but methodical. A retired JAG officer turned disability rights advocate, Calvin didn't waste time. I emailed him everything I had, pictures, videos, documents. By noon, he'd already drafted a formal cease and desist to the HOA citing the ADA and demanding the immediate reinstatement of my ramp. "Let's give them rope," he told me over the phone. "The kind they can hang themselves with." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. The following day, I got my groceries delivered. The driver knocked once, waited a full minute, then left the bags at the bottom of the porch. I could see the tops of the paper bags from the window, milk, bread, fruit I'd never touch. I called my daughter that night. I told her not to come. She offered, of course she did, but she had a life, a family, and I'd spent years teaching her not to carry my burdens. I didn't want this to become hers. Still, the anger in her voice gave me a sliver of hope. "She did what?" she said, almost spitting through the phone. She had it taken down, claimed it violated aesthetic harmony, whatever that means. "That's illegal, Dad. That's not just cruel, it's illegal." "I know," I said softly. "I'm handling it. I'll be there this weekend. You don't have to. I'm not coming to fix anything. I'm coming to witness." I hung up with tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because I realized how often I'd carried this fight alone. Being in a wheelchair had become a kind of armor. You grow used to independence even when it isolates you. But this wasn't just my fight anymore. 2 days later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You're disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. This could have been avoided if you followed the rules. Don't make things worse for yourself." It wasn't signed. Of course it wasn't. Cowards never leave their names. I scanned the paper, logged it into my growing evidence folder, and forwarded it to Calvin. That same afternoon, I got a knock at the door. I wheeled myself to the window and saw Karen standing there alone this time. No clipboard, no entourage, just her arms crossed, mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something bitter. I didn't open the door. She stood there for a while, then slipped something through the mail slot and walked away. I waited until she'd turned the corner before picking it up. It was a brochure for voluntary relocation services for seniors with disabilities. No note, no explanation, just a pamphlet. I laughed. Loud, sharp. It echoed through the empty house like thunder in a cathedral. She wanted me to move. She thought she could break me, guilt me, isolate me, push me out like an inconvenience. But what she didn't know is that my entire life had been a lesson in standing firm. I didn't run when my wife died. I didn't run when my spine cracked like dry wood. And I wasn't going to run now. The next week, Calvin filed an injunction. It was the first blow. Karen and the board responded with a brief full of hollow legal jargon and redacted photos. But they hadn't expected me to come prepared. They didn't know I had video footage of the ramp removal. That I had audio of Karen admitting it looked bad for the neighborhood. That I had email records, timestamps, and now a growing list of neighbors willing to speak up because something had shifted. Word had started to spread. First, it was the retired couple 3 doors down, who brought over soup and whispered, "We never liked her, you know." Then it was the mailman who dropped a quiet, "They did you wrong, sir, with my package." HOAs are built on silence, on neighbors too afraid to speak, too busy to get involved. But all it takes is one crack in the dam. Calvin scheduled a hearing for the following month. Until then, the HOA was barred from any further modifications to my property. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She filed another violation this time, citing excessive legal correspondence as a disruption to community cohesion. I almost laughed. Then I filed a formal ADA complaint with the Department of Justice. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The ramp was still gone. The porch still out of reach, but something deeper had returned. Control. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting. I was advancing. And Karen's empire, built on paperwork and intimidation, had just met its match. From that point on, I didn't go anywhere without some form of documentation. If I wheeled out onto the porch, even just to watch the sky turn purple, at dusk, I clipped a voice recorder to my collar. If I received a package, I snapped a photo of where it was left and who brought it. I reviewed every minute of footage my doorbell camera captured, storing it neatly on an encrypted hard drive Calvin had given me. "This isn't just about you anymore," he told me during one of our late-night calls. "This is about precedent. If we win this, we're not just restoring your ramp, we're stopping them from doing this to anyone else ever again." He was right. This fight had grown larger than me, and Karen could feel it. Her actions became bolder but also sloppier. On Monday, I received 3 citations in one envelope. One was for unauthorized surveillance equipment, my doorbell camera. The second was for hostile signage referring to a small sticker I'd placed on my window that read, "This home is protected by the ADA." The third hilariously accused me of creating community discord by speaking to the local news. It was the last one that made me realize Karen was afraid. Her power didn't come from real authority. It came from silence. From people shrugging and saying, "That's just how HOAs are." But I'd broken that spell. I was naming things, making them public. And Karen didn't know how to survive in the daylight. The news piece aired that Friday, a short 2-minute segment on the evening local broadcast. They showed a shot of my ramp before it was removed, then cut to footage of me speaking from my porch. I kept it simple. I just want to come and go from my house like anyone else. That's it. No dramatics, no insults, just truth. By Saturday, everything changed. I heard a knock at the door. When I answered, it was not Karen. It was a neighbor I'd never spoken to. A man named James, early 50s schoolteacher, polite to the point of nervousness. "I saw you on the news," he said, avoiding eye contact. I'm sorry. For what you've been through, I didn't know." I thanked him. He hesitated. "Then you're not the only one." Karen fined us last year for painting our door the wrong shade of blue. It was almost identical to what the guidelines said, but she claimed it lacked warmth. We had to repaint it twice. He paused. "I've got her emails. If they help, you can have them." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about disability access anymore. It was about a community ruled by someone who had turned regulation into a weapon and left collateral damage in her wake. By the end of the week, I had 4 more neighbors come forward. A young couple fined for installing a small bench on their front lawn for their elderly mother. A single mother who was told her child's chalk drawings violated visual integrity. An elderly woman who'd stopped planting tomatoes in her yard because Karen claimed vegetable beds were agricultural pollution. I documented every story. Calvin and I built a file so thick it could have been a phone book. And still, Karen pressed on. One afternoon, I watched from my window as she conducted what could only be described as an HOA patrol. She walked the sidewalk, slowly flanked by her 2 usual companions, jotting down notes, peering over fences. When she passed my house, she lingered longer, stared, took a photo. I waved. She didn't wave back. That night, I received a notice taped to my front door, again unsigned. It accused me of intimidating HOA leadership and threatened further consequences. I scanned it, timestamped it, and added it to the archive. Then I installed a second camera, this time facing the street. A week later, something unexpected happened. I received a letter, not a violation, not a threat, but a personal handwritten note. It was from one of the HOA board members, the same woman who had stood beside Karen during her first visit to my home. Her name was Lynn. "Mr. Corwin, I'm writing this as a neighbor, not a board member. I wanted you to know I didn't agree with the removal of your ramp. I didn't vote for it. Karen made the decision before the board had a chance to formally discuss the matter. I regret not speaking up sooner. I've decided to resign from the board effective immediately. If there's anything I can do to assist in your case, I'm willing. Respectfully, Lynn M. I sat with that letter for a long time, longer than I thought I would. Because it meant the crack in Karen's power wasn't just growing, it had reached the foundation. By the following week, the court date was officially set. Calvin called me personally. You ready to bring this all the way? I looked at the folder on my desk, the videos, the letters, the stories, the photos, the law. And I thought about the ramp. Not just the wooden nails, but what it represented. My place in this world. Yes, I said. Let's finish what she started. The courthouse was a modest, pale brick building nestled between a post office and a diner that served more stories than coffee. Calvin and I arrived early, too early maybe, but I didn't mind sitting in the quiet waiting room under the ticking wall clock. It gave me time to breathe, to center myself, to remind my nerves that this wasn't a war, it was a reckoning. I wore my best shirt, a navy button-down my daughter had bought me for her wedding years ago. She said it made me look like a professor. I liked the way the cuffs rested neatly over my wrists, clean and simple. It wasn't about looking sharp, it was about showing up with dignity. Calvin wheeled me into the hearing room with the same calm confidence he carried into every space. He was a tall man, quiet-eyed, and deliberate in his movement. Once, a Navy attorney, now one of the most feared disability rights advocates in our part of the state. He didn't yell. He didn't grandstand. But when he spoke, people listened. And that was exactly what I needed. On the other side of the room, Karen arrived, flanked by a tall man in a designer suit who looked like he'd never set foot on a porch in his life. Her lips were pursed so tight, they looked like they'd forgotten how to smile. She didn't look at me, didn't even glance my way. She just shuffled papers in her lap, pretending I wasn't there. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and reading glasses. She wore low on her nose, entered briskly, and took her seat. She scanned both tables with practiced indifference. Let's proceed, she said. Calvin stood. Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mr. Samuel Corwin, a disabled veteran and homeowner, has been subjected to unlawful and discriminatory treatment by the Meadow Hills Homeowners Association and its acting chairwoman, Mrs. Karen Holt. He laid out the facts like a builder laying bricks, precise, unshakable. The unauthorized removal of the ramp, the violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the psychological and physical toll, the documented threats, the silence from the HOA, the abuse of authority by a board member acting outside the scope of protocol. He didn't raise his voice once. When he finished, the room was still. Karen's attorney rose and began his rebuttal with a smirk that had too many teeth. He called me a disgruntled homeowner, said I escalated unnecessarily, claimed my ramp was a safety hazard, said I had refused to comply with reasonable requests. Then he handed the judge a copy of the HOA handbook, highlighted and tabbed like a college thesis. But Calvin was ready. If I may, Your Honor, he said, standing again, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Section 2.63 of the Meadow Hills HOA bylaws regarding emergency medical accommodations. The judge nodded, adjusting her glasses. Go ahead. Calvin flipped to a page in his binder. It states, in cases where health or disability necessitates structural modifications for safety or access, the homeowner may proceed with installation pending retroactive review. He paused. Mrs. Holt did not offer review. She removed the ramp, without approval, without vote, without legal consultation. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Calvin continued. Furthermore, per Title III of the ADA, a homeowner cannot be denied reasonable access modifications to their primary residence. Federal law supersedes HOA bylaws, period. Karen's attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge held up her hand. Let him finish. Calvin stepped back. My client is not here seeking vengeance. He is seeking restoration of his access, of his rights, of the dignity stripped from him without due process. He sat down. The judge took a long pause, tapping her pen against the bench. Then she looked directly at Karen. Mrs. Holt, did you or did you not approve the removal of Mr. Corwin's ramp? Karen licked her lips. Yes, I approved it, but it was in violation of community standards. Did you consult the board? There was a flicker in her eyes. Not formally, no. But I have executive authority. That's not what I asked, the judge interrupted. Karen glanced at her attorney, but the room was already turning cold. The judge looked down at the papers in front of her, then up at me. Mr. Corwin, is your ramp still removed? Yes, Your Honor. Have you been able to safely exit and enter your home independently since its removal? No, ma'am. She leaned back. I am issuing a preliminary ruling. The HOA is to restore the ramp within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in fines of $5,000 per day payable to the plaintiff. Karen's mouth dropped open. The judge wasn't done. Furthermore, given the nature of the violations, both procedural and humanitarian, I am scheduling a hearing for civil damages. We will determine restitution for emotional and physical hardship, as well as any financial losses incurred. She slammed her gavel once. We are adjourned. The room erupted into low murmurs. Karen stood frozen, staring ahead like she'd been struck. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't respond. Calvin packed our things slowly. This is only the first round, he said softly. But it's a hell of a start. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with summer. The news crew from the local station was waiting again. I gave them a few words, calm, direct. All I want is what any neighbor deserves: access and respect. I looked into the camera lens and thought about the people watching. The ones who were still afraid to speak up. The ones who had already given up. HOAs were meant to protect communities, I said. But when they stop protecting people, we have to remind them who the community really is. Back home, I sat in my chair by the window and looked out over the porch. It still had no ramp, but now it had something else. Hope. Because justice had taken its first step. And Karen, she'd just taken her first step into a world where consequences finally applied to her. You can tell a lot about a person by how they react when they're cornered. Some go quiet, some lash out. But Karen, she smiled. Not the warm kind of smile you give a friend or a stranger on the street. No, this was the tight-forced smirk of someone who thinks they're untouchable. The kind of smile you wear when you've built a kingdom out of rules and fear, and suddenly the peasants are banging on the gates. It happened the morning of the damages hearing. We were back in that same beige courtroom with its slightly crooked flags and tired carpet. Calvin was reviewing notes beside me, calm as ever. Across the aisle, Karen sat rigid in a navy suit jacket, with shoulder pads that looked a decade too old. Her lawyer, the same smug man from the first hearing, whispered something to her. That's when she looked over at me and smirked. It didn't last long. The judge entered, and the courtroom snapped to attention. Let's proceed with the damages hearing in the matter of Corwin versus Meadow Hills HOA, she said. Calvin rose. Your Honor, we are submitting a claim for the emotional and physical distress caused by the illegal removal of my client's accessibility ramp, as well as for the costs of legal representation and necessary interim services. He laid out the details with precision. The grocery deliveries I missed, the canceled medical appointments, the 2 weeks I couldn't leave my home unassisted, the psychological toll of being forcibly isolated, the threats, the unsigned letters, the violations. Then came the witness list. First was my daughter. She testified with the calm fury only a protective child can summon. I had to watch my father, who served this country, who never once asked anyone for help, be trapped in his own house because a group of strangers decided his needs were unsightly. That's not just negligence, that's cruelty. Next came James, the neighbor with the blue door. He spoke of the pattern, the way Karen ruled with condescension, dressed up as policy. It's not about the rules, he said, it's about control. Then Lynn, the former board member who had resigned after my ramp was removed, took the stand. She was nervous at first, but once she started speaking, the truth poured out like floodwaters through a cracked dam. Karen didn't consult the board. She never did. She issued fines, made threats, and bullied people into compliance. Anyone who challenged her ended up with extra citations or public shaming at meetings. And when it came to Mr. Corwin, she treated his disability like an inconvenience, not a protected right. Karen's lawyer objected, of course. Speculation. Character assassination. The judge overruled it. Lynn finished with a trembling voice. I stayed quiet too long. And I'm sorry. After that, Calvin rested our case. Then it was Karen's turn. Her lawyer stood buttoned his jacket and began to spin a story about maintaining community standards and ensuring the harmony of the neighborhood. Karen never looked at me while he spoke. She kept her gaze locked on the judge's chin tilted upward, like a queen forced to attend her own trial. Eventually, the judge turned to her directly. Mrs. Holt, do you have anything you'd like to say? Karen stood slowly. She adjusted the cuffs of her jacket and began with what I'm sure she thought was poise. I have always acted in the best interest of Meadow Hills, she said. My intentions were never malicious. I was simply enforcing the standards we all agreed to when we purchased homes there. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even when those standards violated federal law, Karen hesitated. I believed I was within my authority. The judge tapped her pen against the desk. Do you deny ordering the removal of Mr. Corwin's ramp without a vote from the HOA board? Another pause. No, I do not deny it. And do you deny receiving a certified letter informing you of Mr. Corwin's rights under the ADA? Karen's mouth twitched. I received it. The judge leaned forward. Then you knowingly violated federal law. Silence. Karen's smirk was gone. The judge sat back in her chair. Very well. She reached for a folder, opened it, and began reading. Given the overwhelming evidence, witness testimony, and Mrs. Holt's own admission of unauthorized action, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Samuel Corwin. Karen's lawyer tried to interject, but she held up her hand. The Meadow Hills HOA will pay damages totaling $65,000 to cover legal costs, emotional distress, and accessibility modifications. Furthermore, as restitution for the sustained harm caused by the unlawful actions of Mrs. Holt, and due to her repeated disregard for compliance and due process, this court orders the transfer of title of Mrs. Holt's property located at 1145 Maple Grove Lane to the plaintiff, Mr. Corwin, as partial settlement. The courtroom gasped. Karen's head whipped toward her lawyer. What? You told me? Her lawyer looked pale. The judge's voice cut through the tension. This court does not take lightly the forced immobility of a disabled citizen. Mrs. Holt's property will serve as compensation for the dignity she stripped away. Karen's lip quivered. I didn't mean, she began, but her voice broke. This isn't fair. Neither was trapping a man in his own home, the judge said, calmly. We are adjourned. The gavel fell. Karen's smirk, once a symbol of control, shattered in real time. She crumbled into her seat, eyes wide, mouth slack. She looked less like a queen now and more like a child who just realized the game was over. As I was wheeled out of the courtroom, reporters shouted questions. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already had everything I came for. Not revenge. Not even the house. Just justice. And the right to come and go free. 2 days after the verdict, I stood at the foot of the ramp that had just been reinstalled this time. Not by volunteers or contractors. I had to hire myself, but by order of the court funded by the very HOA that once tried to strip it from me. The wood was new, but the slope was familiar. I rolled down slowly, the wheels humming softly beneath me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the sun on my face from the sidewalk. But the battle wasn't over. Karen had filed an appeal. Her lawyer, now visibly shaken by the court's decision to transfer her property, scrambled to delay the final handover. They claimed emotional duress, misrepresentation, procedural error. Calvin, ever composed, told me not to worry. This is where the real legal work begins, he said, eyes focused and calm. They made the mistake of pushing this into a court of law. Now it's our domain. I trusted him completely. The appeal was set to be heard by a review panel in the county circuit, 3 judges, a tighter window, and far less tolerance for drama. Calvin saw it as an opportunity to shut the door on Karen's games once and for all. We met late into the evening, several nights in a row, going through every document, every timeline, every photograph. Calvin wanted this airtight, not just for me, but for the precedent it would set. If this stands, he said, tapping the top of our evidence binder, it'll become case law in this state. HOAs will think twice before trying this again. I nodded. I'd come into this battle just trying to reclaim my access to the world. Now it had become something larger, something generational. The hearing arrived on a crisp, clear morning. My daughter drove me. She hadn't missed a single important date since this all began, and as she helped me out of the car, she squeezed my shoulder. She's not going to win this, Dad, she said. Not anymore. The review panel sat in a smaller courtroom. Less pomp, more scrutiny. Everything felt closer, more intimate, like nothing could hide in shadows here. Karen looked different this time. Smaller. The sharp blazer had been replaced by something softer. Her hair, once sculpted into rigid defiance, now hung loosely around her face. The smirk was gone. So was the lawyer who'd failed her. She had a new representative, less flashy, more apologetic. Their defense was simple, that the punishment was disproportionate, that the transfer of her home was too severe, that Karen had acted in misguided diligence, not cruelty. Calvin stood and addressed the panel with the clarity of a man who had been here before. Your Honors, this is not a case of simple overreach. This is a case of willful harm. Mrs. Holt had knowledge of the law. She received certified documentation. She ignored it. She ordered the removal of a medical accessibility device resulting in physical hardship, emotional trauma, and direct violation of federal rights. He paused and then added, she had every opportunity to stop. She chose not to. The judges asked a few questions. One wanted clarification on the ramp's structure. Another asked for specifics on HOA protocol. Calvin had it all, but it was the final question posed by the eldest judge that sealed Karen's fate. If we reverse the property transfer, he asked, voice steady, what message does that send to other disabled homeowners facing similar violations? Karen's lawyer fumbled. We acknowledge the severity. We are only requesting alternative damages, monetary, perhaps. And if the plaintiff had been unable to afford legal counsel, the judge pressed. Should justice be reserved only for those who can fight for it? The silence in the room answered for them. When the verdict was announced, it wasn't just a ruling. It was a statement. Appeal denied. The transfer of property would stand. The damages would be upheld. And Karen's name, once printed atop HOA newsletters and minutes, would now be attached to a ruling that reshaped the way communities treat their vulnerable members. As we left the courtroom, Calvin allowed himself a rare smile. That, he said, was for every homeowner they ever tried to silence. The media was waiting outside again. I spoke briefly, more for others than for myself. This isn't just about one ramp, or one man, or one neighborhood. This is about fairness, about dignity, about reminding the powerful that there are lines you don't cross no matter how many bylaws you think are on your side. Karen didn't leave through the front entrance. I saw her slip out the back with her lawyer head, low shoulders hunched. Her reign was over not just on paper, but in the hearts and minds of the people she once ruled. Back at home, I rolled down the new ramp again. This time slower, more thoughtful. The wood creaked slightly fresh, unfinished, but it was beautiful in its simplicity. My daughter had hung a small wind chime beside the porch. It danced in the breeze, clear and bright. For the first time in months, I sat outside without waiting for the other shoe to drop. The fight had turned. The tables were no longer tilted in their favor. In the days following the final verdict, everything around me felt different. Calmer, yes, but also heavier. As if the neighborhood was holding its breath, unsure of how to exhale after everything that had transpired. Some neighbors waved again, hesitant but kind. Others avoided eye contact crossing the street, as though I had become a symbol of something they didn't want to acknowledge. But I didn't mind. The truth had its own weight, and I'd grown strong enough to carry it. The deed to Karen's former home arrived in a plain envelope, no fanfare, no ceremonial handing over of keys. Just paper, ink, and justice. Calvin met me on my porch to go over the transition. He carried a clipboard not unlike Karen's, but his carried freedom, not control. All the paperwork's finalized, he said, handing it to me. It's yours now, Sam, every square inch. I looked at the house from where we sat. It was just 3 doors down. A quaint 2-story colonial with a blue front door, ironically the very same shade Karen had once fined James for. The shutters were perfectly aligned, the lawn trimmed to the exact inch prescribed by HOA standards. And now it was mine. You gonna live in it? Calvin asked, half teasing. I chuckled. God, no. I've got everything I need right here. But I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. He raised an eyebrow. You're not gonna flip it. I shook my head. Better. I'm going to give it a new purpose. The next week, a wooden sign went up on the lawn of 1145 Maple Grove Lane. The Access House. Community Resource Center for Disability Rights and Homeowner Advocacy. Below that, a smaller sign. You are not alone. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Some neighbors were thrilled. They brought cookies, offered help, asked about volunteer opportunities. Others posted passive-aggressive rants in the HOA newsletter. One anonymous message called it a political stunt disguised as charity. Another complained that the wheelchair-accessible additions I made to the property would lower property values. But the tide was shifting. I started getting letters, emails, phone calls, people from across the county, and even out of state reaching out to say thank you, sharing their own stories of HOA harassment, asking for advice, looking for a place to begin their own fights. One message stuck with me. It was from an older gentleman in Florida. And I'm a Korean War vet. Lost part of my leg in 1971. My HOA fined me for installing a railing next to my driveway. Said it made the neighborhood look like a hospital. I never fought it. I wish I had. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. I printed it and framed it. It hangs on the wall of the access house, now just beside a copy of the court ruling with the judge's signature highlighted in bold ink. Karen, meanwhile, moved out of Meadow Hills quietly. I heard through James that she took a temporary lease in another gated community a few towns over. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But what surprised me more was the aftermath within the HOA. 2 board members resigned within the month. A special election was held. For the first time in years, actual debate happened at the meetings, no longer Karen's monologue, but a conversation. And perhaps the most symbolic shift of all, the handbook was revised. Page 42, where once it restricted unauthorized medical fixtures, now bore new language written with Calvin's help and adopted unanimously. No HOA policy shall interfere with a homeowner's federally protected right to reasonable accommodation, access, or dignity. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a line in the sand, and as weeks turned into months, I began to feel a strange, unfamiliar thing creeping back into my life. Peace. It didn't come all at once. It was in the little things. The hum of my wheelchair wheels on the smooth ramp boards. The way the wind chime sounded on a windy afternoon. The feeling of sunlight on my face without the weight of suspicion. One evening, my daughter visited with her 2 boys. We sat on the porch as they played in the front yard, running between my ramp and the new flower beds James helped me plant. "You look taller," she joked, handing me a glass of lemonade. I grinned. That's because I finally stood up for myself in a chair. She laughed, but I saw the pride in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Dad, not just for winning, but for turning it into something more." I nodded. I didn't want to just tear Karen down. I wanted to build something better. And we had. Not just a legal victory, not just a new center, but a reminder that when people fight back quietly, steadily, with truth and resilience, they can shake the very foundations of injustice. That night, I wheeled over to the access house alone. I unlocked the front door, walked the halls one more time, and turned on the porch light. A neighbor passed by with his dog and paused. "Thanks for doing this," he said. I smiled. For all of us. The day Karen handed over her keys wasn't marked by any official announcement or ceremony. No security escort, no HOA farewell luncheon. Just a quiet transfer scheduled for 9 a.m. on a gray Monday morning. I didn't need to be there, but I went. Not out of revenge. Not to watch her suffer. I went because I wanted to see the final act of something that had loomed over my life for months, no years, if I was being honest. I wanted closure. She arrived 10 minutes late, driving the same spotless white SUV that had once parked arrogantly at the end of my driveway, blocking my mailbox. She stepped out slowly, her posture still erect, still trying to hold on to whatever authority she once wielded. But the sharp edges had dulled. Her movements were hesitant, her eyes shadowed. Calvin was already there, flanked by a representative from the title office and a notary public. This wasn't a courtroom, but it felt more official than any meeting Karen had ever hosted as HOA chair. She clutched a thin folder with trembling hands. Mrs. Holt Calvin greeted her, his voice firm but polite. Karen didn't respond. She looked over at me, her lips twitching, somewhere between a scowl and a plea. I didn't offer anything in return, just met her gaze and held it. The notary went through the paperwork step by step. Karen signed each page in silence. The only sound was the rustling of legal documents and the occasional clearing of her throat. When it was done, Calvin slid the final document across the hood of the SUV for her signature. This one confirms the voluntary and uncontested transfer of ownership, including the physical surrender of keys and digital access codes, he said. Karen picked up the pen slowly, then stopped. "I built this house," she said softly. It caught everyone off guard. Even Calvin hesitated. She continued, her voice cracking. "I didn't build it myself, of course. But I chose every fixture, every tile. I planted that dogwood tree in the yard. My husband and I..." She paused, swallowing. "We raised our kids here. This was supposed to be my last house." No one said a word. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. Calvin's tone stayed neutral, and yet it did. Karen blinked rapidly. Her hand trembled as she tried to sign the page, but halfway through her name, she dropped the pen. It clattered against the pavement, and then just like that, she broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Not the poised single-drop kind, but the uncontrolled kind that hit in waves. She slumped forward, bracing herself against the hood of the car, shoulders shaking. For a moment, it wasn't the HOA tyrant in front of me. It was just a woman who'd finally realized what her pride had cost her. I lost everything, she sobbed. My home, my name, my place here. And for what? I didn't move, didn't speak. I let the silence answer her. Because the truth was, I hadn't taken anything from Karen. She had given it all away, piece by piece, with every fine, every threat, every time she chose power over humanity. The notary knelt quietly to retrieve the pen, placing it gently back into Karen's hand. She finished signing with a trembling flourish. Then she handed over the keys. It was over. Karen stood upright, wiped her face, and turned to me one last time. I hope you're happy. Her words weren't angry. They were hollow, tired. I answered calmly. I'm not happy you lost your home, Karen. I'm just glad I didn't lose mine. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned away and climbed into her SUV. The door closed with a soft click. And just like that, she was gone. No applause, no comeuppance beyond the law. But justice had a quiet way of finishing things. Later that day, I walked through the house she once ruled from. It was empty now, no floral drapes, no ornamental mirrors, no scent of potpourri masking control. Just walls, just space. And in that space, I saw opportunity. I opened a window and let the wind in. It carried the smell of cut grass and a distant barbecue, normal things, peaceful things. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom and looked out the window. From there, I could see my house, my ramp, the flag fluttering gently above my porch, the kids down the street chalking rainbows on the sidewalk. A community, not a kingdom. That night, a neighbor left a covered dish on my porch. Another brought by a set of hand tools. James offered to help repaint the access house's front room, and Lynn, quiet, resolute Lynn, brought a basket of newsletters from other HOAs, now seeking guidance for reform. The ripples were growing. Karen had been the storm, but now in her absence, something better was blooming. Not fear, not punishment, but a quiet, powerful kind of healing. The kind that doesn't need headlines, just open doors, open ramps, and open hearts. Spring came early the following year. The cherry trees lining Maple Grove Lane bloomed brighter than I remembered, petals fluttering in the breeze like tiny slips of forgiveness. The air smelled sweeter too, not because the world had changed, but because we had, because I had. The access house had transformed from a symbol of courtroom victory into something far more meaningful. What was once Karen Holt's throne of petty control had become a place of welcome conversation and movement, a space where people who felt powerless now felt seen. On Tuesdays, we hosted open hours for anyone needing legal advice. Calvin, bless him, still carved out time to volunteer between cases, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug and listening to stories that echoed my own. Veterans, single parents, retirees. Some came in wheelchairs, some in silence. All left with tools and hope. Fridays were reserved for the community repair crew, a group of neighbors who, after years of fearing citations for painting outside the lines, finally embraced the beauty of imperfection. We patched ramps, replaced porch railings, planted vegetables where once only HOA-approved hydrangeas were allowed. And once a month, on Sunday afternoons, we opened the back lawn for what we called access circles, informal gatherings where people shared stories. Some were about fights they'd lost, others about fights they were finally ready to begin. There was no judgment, only understanding, only healing. I watched it all unfold from my own porch, sometimes the one that had started it all. The ramp, now varnished and reinforced, stood like a quiet monument. Not flashy, not loud, but there. Permanent, unapologetic. One afternoon, as I rolled down the ramp toward the mailbox, a boy I didn't recognize waved at me from his bike. "Are you the guy who stood up to the HOA?" he called out. I chuckled. I guess so. He gave a thumbs up, then pedaled away. I stood there for a moment, holding a letter from the county commissioner's office, an invitation to join a roundtable on accessibility infrastructure. Me, a retired contractor who once just wanted to be left alone, now being asked to help shape policy. It was strange how life had unfolded. I hadn't set out to be a voice for anyone. I wasn't a hero or an activist or anything noble. I was just tired of being treated like I didn't belong in my own home. But maybe that's what made it powerful. Because there are thousands of people like me, quiet, proud, pushed to the edge by people who confuse rules with righteousness. And maybe all it takes is one of us to say enough for the silence to break. I accepted the commissioner's invitation, attended the meeting in a pressed shirt and new shoes, navigating the marble halls of local government with the same wheels Karen once tried to erase from her sightline. They listened, they took notes, and they asked me to come back. At home, I started writing again. Not legal complaints or affidavits, but essays, reflections, letters to the younger version of myself who thought dignity had to be silent. Calvin said I should publish them. My daughter agreed. I called the collection Access Granted. On the anniversary of the ruling, we held a gathering at the Access House. Not a celebration exactly, more like a pause. A breath. A chance to reflect on how far we'd come. James grilled burgers. Lynn brought lemonade. Even the new HOA board sent a letter of thanks acknowledging how my case had shaped their approach to policy with a more human lens. The turnout was modest but real. People hugged. People laughed. People walked through a house that once denied access, now filled with ramps, railings, and open doors. Before everyone left, I gave a short speech. Nothing rehearsed, just something from the heart. I didn't fight for revenge, I said, looking around the room, and I didn't fight to win someone else's house. I fought because access is not charity. It's not a favor, it's a right. There was a pause, then a murmur of agreement, a few quiet claps, and something deeper stillness, the kind that settles over people who understand. When the sun dipped low and everyone had gone, I wheeled around the back of the house to the garden. Karen's old dogwood tree was still there. Calvin had suggested we take it down, said I deserved a clean slate, but I kept it. It wasn't the tree's fault, it had grown in the shadow of control. Now it was growing in the light. I reached up and tied a small ribbon around one of the branches, deep blue, like the shirt I wore in court. It fluttered in the breeze, a reminder that some things are worth standing for, even when you're sitting down.